In the quiet, in the stillness, I know that you are God. In the secret of your presence, I know there I am restored. When you call, I won't refuse. And each new day again I'll choose. There is no one else for me, none but Jesus, crucified to set me free. Now I live to bring him praise. In the chaos, in confusion, I know you're sovereign still. In the moment of my weakness, you give me grace to do your will. And when you call, I won't delay. This my song through all my days. There is no one else for me, none but Jesus, crucified to set me free. Now I live to bring him praise. There is no one else for me, none but Jesus, crucified to set me free. Now I live to bring him praise. Oh, my delight is in you, Lord. All of my hope, all of my strength, all my delight is in you, Lord, forevermore. There is no one else for me, none but Jesus, crucified to set me free. Now I live to bring him praise. There is no one else for me, none but Jesus, crucified to set me free. Now I live to bring him praise. Amen. Here I am, down on my knees again, surrendering all, surrendering all. and find me here, Lord, as you draw me near. I'm desperate for you. I'm desperate for you. I surrender. Drench my soul as mercy and grace unfold. I hunger and thirst. I hunger and thirst. With arms stretched wide, I know you hear my cry. Speak to me now. Speak to me now. I surrender. I surrender. I want to know you more. I want to know you more. I surrender. I surrender. I want to know you more. I want to know you more. Like a rushing wind, Jesus, breathe within. Lord, have your way. Lord, have your way in me. Like a mighty storm, stir within my soul. Lord, have your way. Lord, have your way in me. Like a rushing wind, Jesus, breathe within. Lord, have your way. Lord, have your way in me. Like a mighty storm, stir within my soul. Lord, have your way. Lord, have your way in me. Lord, have your way. Lord, have your way in me. I surrender. I surrender. I want to know you more. I want to know you more. I surrender. I surrender. I want to know you more. I want to know you more. Amen. Stevie P, right here. We love on each other right here every week.
Come, come to the water, all who are thirsty, come and be filled. Come, come to the river, brothers and sisters, come and be healed. Come and be healed.
Andrew, before you go down, do you mind grabbing me a couple of double A's? I just saw something here. Batteries. Well, maybe it came back. It's right now. Yeah, all right. First of all, I would like to welcome you all tonight. I already had plenty of people making fun of my shirt. I thought after no sunshine today, you could use a little. Maybe not. Outside of that, thank you. Outside of that, Uncle Denise, we want to give a shout out to Denise. I'm sorry, I don't even know your last name now. It was L'Italian. Paul and Mark's brother. Kelly said she texted to say, I'm on with y'all. So a shout out to her. And I'm afraid I'll even say it wrong. It's not Concord. I don't say it right. How do you say it? Concord, New Hampshire. And I just don't, so she's up there. We're down here, and we're loving you, missing you. Tell Brian said hi, and Rachel, I believe it is. So anyway, she said that if she can't pull us up to be there with her, she'll at least come and join us what she can over things here. So I'm glad they made it back safe and sound. And thank you all for what a team. What a team. The events of this past week, I truly want to emphasize my appreciation and thanksgiving and not being alone, and not just feeling like people were praying for me. It was greater than that. I mean, it was just a presence together, one body, and the multiple ways you showed generosity. And my apologies too. It's just, I can't explain. I'm not trying to excuse, but Sunday I screwed up the announcement at the end. I was, in my mind, trying to overemphasize, just be considerate here, and usually it's like, we don't necessarily fight to get to the front, but if we can stand close to the door where we can be the first in line for eating, we will. And I just wanted to make sure that the family and all their friends and the ones that had traveled to be here Sunday, that they would get to be fed first. And I guess the way I said it, it came across as, I want all of you to leave because you're not welcome. And that wasn't at all what I was feeling or thinking. It wasn't written down for me, and I don't write things down. So when I'm done at the message, my mind's still spinning and twirling, and I apologize for anything that I misconveyed in that regard. And I think it may even be a Bible verse, but one of the things says, where there are many words, there are also mistakes that are made. So, yeah, that happened to me there. One thing before we get going here tonight, too, is just obviously prayers for those that have been affected by the storm. A lot of people without power tonight. I'm very proud of all you being here. Somebody sent, the thing, and I heard it on the radio about the, I kind of like it. I'm that way. We're under curfew. We're not supposed to be here because we're in the corner of Bartow County. But the cops don't come down this far very often, so I think we're safe. But there are people seriously hurt or, a death, as well as others that I'm sure are reeling from the storms up in Adairsville area. And we've got family and friends from the branches past that the Pelfreys that live up in that area. So please, please, please keep them in your prayers. And I don't usually keep my phone with me. I wanted to tonight because at the end I'll share a little bit about what they said in regard to things that we could do to help. I already got things from the Bartow County Ministers Association. But we're not here for that. We're here for this. So if you will, let's pray. God and Father, I do thank you for the teamwork that what your church can be. And when you say that we're one body in many parts, you aren't just trying to give a figurative way that we could look at things. You mean it. And God, as I said last week, when one hurts, we hurt. When one rejoices, we rejoice. And God, we seek in faith to overcome that which is bittersweet, to Lord, in faith, to proclaim you and to allow you to not let us just get back to normal. God, it's greater than that. But to be able to apply what we have learned. And Lord, in ministering to a family this past week, but others that are around us. But also, God, how we are to incorporate in our life so that what if it were us, but not only that, but what about others and the consideration that we talked about Sunday morning, Lord, that your word says that let us therefore consider. And God, I pray that we would continue in that and that we would allow lives, Lord, to count, our own as well as others around us. And Lord, so help us as we get back to doing some of the normal things, to not just do them in normal ways, but to do them with an extra sensitivity, to be aware. And God, tonight, even as I preach, I want to be aware. Just not that it would be hindered or anything, God, but certainly aware of you. And Jesus, the sacrifice that 2,000 years later we could still preach and proclaim. The communion that we can hold up, your body and your blood, Jesus Christ, saying thank you. And what a strange thing that we would give thanks for something that was so devastating. But it's because it's so life-giving. And might you continue to give life throughout. Father, thank you for brothers and sisters that would forgive me in the midst of my miscommunication. But thank you even more, Lord, that you would bless us, that we could communicate from your word with clarity. And God, not that I do, but we do as we seek you, God, even tonight. Praying that, Lord, that each one that's here could hear something from you, and each one that's listening, Lord, would hear something that would be from you. It might be my mouth and my voice that it sounds like, but God, I pray that it would be your voice or your thoughts and your things that you want to inspire us with, as well as to correct or direct us with. And God, tonight, I just humbly thank you that for these that would come out, and instead of using the storms as a possible excuse to stay away, God would say, no, man, let's go. And so tonight we're here, Lord, to let your light shine as you shine upon us. Might we take it with us, Lord, and might we allow it to be more than just attending. Might we participate, Lord, even in your word, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. We're in the book of Hebrews chapter 11, and here in 11 we've spent the last couple of weeks looking at faith, the definition of it, being sure of what we hope for, certain of what we don't see. And we went on to look at how creation, and part of faith is believing that God created by speaking. And so we journeyed back, and I hope you enjoyed that, looking back at what creation has to tell us in the book of Genesis, and just watching how God did these things. And to me, it was just so cool just imagining in my mind as the various birds and the fish and the wildlife appear, and all those different shapes and features that some we are drawn to and we would consider beautiful, and others we look at and we consider them weird. And it's the same way we kind of have a tendency to do with people, you know. Not saying that that's the right thing to do, but you know, sometimes we kind of judge and evaluate. And of course, we all think that we're each normal, and anybody that's not like us isn't. But God did this creating, and he made each according to his own kind, and he's got something behind it all. I don't know even what it is, but something behind it all. And the simplest thing that we can see is the ecological balance of how things take care of things, and plant life working with animal life, working with the fowl or the bird of the air, and the predators, as well as those that clean up the carcasses. You know, I mean, it's just phenomenal how God has that all working together, and yet we're his crowning achievement. And I don't mean to say that because I want to be. I'm just saying, and it's so amazing, he saved that for last. The best in which way? The best because he made us in his image. That ability to sense or have sensory, to reason, to have emotion and feeling, and going even further with the reason, to not only reason, but to look and to think and calculate and to look for more than just one thing, but to be able to come to a conclusion. And how God did all this, and he created us that way so that we would be, as some have called it, it sounds pretty sterile, but a free moral agent. Meaning that unlike the angels that he created that naturally were inclined to do his bidding, but even there we see that they could make a choice. They did have some will too, because we know Satan rejected and rebelled and was kicked out. God wasn't going to have the mutiny going on, and it wasn't because he was threatened. It was just heaven was threatened. Heaven was threatened with this rebellion of Satan, and so God, kicked him out, and Revelation talks about it as a war in heaven. And so with Satan came a third of the angels. And explaining all that, no, I can't. I just say it says it, and I accept that. But I personally believe that, and it's my opinion, I shouldn't even maybe call it a belief, but with the scriptures, I've come to this conclusion that I really do believe that God planted earth and you and I, mankind, in the midst of where Satan was banished to. We're not in a holy place. I say that because Jesus, even at the end of his life, said that the prince of this world is now reigning as he was coming to the cross. Jesus recognized that this is the hour that darkness reigns, that Satan reigns in that regard. And he tells us that, in this world you'll have trouble, but take heart because I've overcome the world. And overcoming the world means he will bring it into subjection, but not yet. It's still under Satan's control. And so it makes a lot of sense to me, and I realize some people it stretches them too far, but it makes sense to me that God was saying, look, Satan, and whether he calls him that or he was Lucifer is what it alludes to in the Old Testament. But look, I'm trying to show you here that I can create people and not make them love me, but they can choose to love me. And I can even do it in a way that I would start out with them, although they're perfect, they will quickly, be in your hands and you can mislead, but I will still redeem them and I'll bring them back. And that's what I think is just vital. I mean, it increases my admiration of what God was doing, because not only is it reaching out to us, and some people I know accuse God of what kind of a sick, cruel joke is that to put us in a world like this where sin can even prevail when he could have kept it from happening. And I'd have to tell you that I think that the bottom line is that he was reaching out to one of his fallen ones, all of his fallen ones. And he's trying to appeal to the devil and all those the fallen angels and demons or what they've become, these evil spirits, and trying to appeal to them, saying, you can be redeemed. When I sing Amazing Grace, I think it truly is amazing. I don't put a limit on it. When I think about Jesus forgiving all, paying for all what? Sin. Did he say, I will pay for all human sin? Well, we automatically apply or imply that, but he said sin. The sins. And I think personally, I can even take it far enough, and you might think I'm crazy, but far enough that I believe that it's quite possible that on the cross that Jesus Christ even paid for Satan's sin. I don't believe the devil will repent according to what the scriptures say, but I believe he could have, and that's going to be the final checkmate, and that's going to be that part of that final judgment when he shows, even my son died for you, the one that I loved, the one that you rejected, the one you felt you were in competition with, he died for you. And see, in the same way that whether it's my friends or people that I've met or possibly in my family or your friends and family that reject Jesus Christ, in the same way it will be with them. That Jesus did die, and it will be clear someday that he did, but they had rejected it, and it's no longer available. Now, I share all that because that's what it says. Faith is believing what we don't see. And it's believing that God created out of that which was not just invisible, that which was nothing, that God created, but he spoke it into existence. And wrapped up last week talking about how vital it is then that God is also like us in his image. We're given a mouth that can go ahead and give life or take life. And we know by speaking to encourage or speaking to tear down. And wow, what an investment God made. What a risky deal that is, isn't it? Because we add it all up. As neutral as we may think we are, we've probably done far more condemning, criticizing, making fun of, humiliating, whatever life than we have truly building it up, haven't we? And so you see this whole thing taking place, and it's where, I'm amazed at God's faith. God's faith in me and God's faith in you that he would invest in us. So that's what faith is. So we looked at that, and tonight we're going to go on. By faith we understand then, this is it, verse 3 then, we understand the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. But the next one, then it switches quickly to this story of faith or chapter of faith, the hall of faith. By faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings, and by faith he still speaks even though he is dead. So this next verse here, verse 4, is what we're going to look at tonight. And I know I touched on it not so long ago. And we looked at it, and some people said, I'd like to know a little bit more about it. And I'm not just doing it because you want to know more. It's just I don't want you to miss what's really here. Because I think that this is quite this story of Abel that even though we can look at it, it's kind of strange. And we're going to go back to the Old Testament, look at the story there. I want to look at this tonight because I think it really bears out a lot of us maybe gaining understanding about what faith is. That's what this whole context is about. And it starts out, verse 4, saying, by faith Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith. So let's make sure we keep it in context that what did Abel do? Well, he offered a better sacrifice. And everybody always points to that. Well, what was better about it? No, realize first of all, Abel offered his sacrifice by what? Faith. He offered his sacrifice in response to this believing that God did the creating. Abel believed that God created him And he even created his sheep or whatever the animals were that he had in his flock. Abel believed. He didn't know, he just knew possibly it was logical, like any of us should be, that I didn't bring anything into the world. Job said that. I shouldn't be able to take anything out. What I have was from God, so why would I get possessive about it? That's faith, folks. Lack of faith says, by golly, I did it with my own two hands, and I put this together, and it's mine. And we know, well, that's a bad attitude, but we've got that in the back of our mind, don't we? I worked hard for this. I sacrificed for this. And you can go on and fill in the blanks. But I want you to see here that starts out, and this is all jam-packed into this little verse here. Verse 4, by faith Abel offered this sacrifice. Yes, it was better than what Cain's was, and yes, it brought about division and ultimately his death because Cain was infuriated and aggravated by God picking his brother over him or whatever. But what I don't want us to miss here is what it was that Abel did. Abel offered a sacrifice based on his faith, and at the bottom of it, I believe, had to have been this believer that there was a creator God that made things, that he didn't have to understand why or how, he just believed he did, that God made and spoke things into existence, and Abel was willing to take it not only about his sheep or his livestock, but even about himself. God made me. And you see, there are two ways we can say that, at least that. I can say, God made me, look at me, you ought to adore me. Or I can be humbled by it and say, wow, God made me. And some people have taken it to me, the prideful extent. Well, why did God make me the way he did? And whether it's our features that we don't like, physical features, whether it was our family we grew up in, whether it's the temperament we may have, or whether it's the desires of our heart. There's a lot of people rail at God because it's like, it's not fair for God to put this desire in me and then tell me I shouldn't do it. I know our teen kids or the junior high kids, they're coming up on a study they're going to do, and I've been sharing a little bit with the teachers about, talking, how do you talk to your teens about sex, let alone how do you talk to somebody else's kids about it? Not the stuff they get at school. I'm talking about the biblical perspective. And one of the things that I was mentioning is that's what I hear from certain people is like, well, God made me this way. It's not fair for him then to tell me I can't do that. But don't we all have desires? Don't we all want things? And whether it be literally things or want to do or experience things that God says aren't good for us? But are we going to blame it on God, or are we going to instead say, thank you, God, for at least letting us know before we get into it that I ought to stay away from that, and the only reason you tell me is for my good. When he told Adam and Eve to leave this one tree alone, did he do it for himself or for them? For them. But they had to what? Once he said, no, you can't, everything inside of them turned to that and said, but I want, and why wouldn't I? And then the devil, all he had to say was, God just doesn't want you to be as smart as what he is. So I want us to see this, that Abel, he looked at himself as being made from God, by God, God speaking him into existence, that everything that he had, his mom, his dad, and what was around him, God, thank you. And it was from that this evoked a desire. And I don't find anything in the scriptures that at least says that God demanded an offering. But instead, it's exactly the way it worked with Abraham, who was a man of faith, who offered, remember, that tithe to the Melchizedek, the king of Salem, after he had retrieved Lot back and stuff. God didn't say, now go give him an offering. Abraham in his heart said, here, I want to give you the 10% of everything I've just retrieved. I want to give it to you. For what? Because he worshiped with him. And in that same way, I presume and believe that that's what's going on here with Abel. That Abel, out of this awareness of his own creation, of his parents, and of this livestock that he had, he's like, God, I just, and go with me here to Romans 1, because, I think this is vital that we keep this in mind. Romans chapter 1, because one of the things that bears out here is that about how God, speaks to us even through what's been made. And I think that was one of the things still yet even more pure than it is now, but was that the creation part was real clear, probably maybe, not that he was created by God, but just the awesomeness of the way everything still, even with the sweat of the brow, worked together. Picking up with verse 18. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and the wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. So wickedness, not guns specifically, and not this specifically, or that, or disease, or cancer, whatever. Wickedness, okay, is what suppresses the truth about about godliness. Godlessness and wickedness suppress the truth. Okay, since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain, or made it very revealing. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, and what did God make this out of? Nothing visible, okay? God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what he has made, so that men are without excuse. That God created all of this to speak to us, from the sky to the waters to the oceans to the rain to whatever it may be, to sometimes even the storms and the power that they have. God's trying to speak to us and say, I'm here, my fingerprints are all over this. What do we do with it? Oh yeah, I know that. I've got my deal I've got to do. Do we really worship God? Today, in the midst of the storms, were you more panic-stricken? Oh, God, save me. I don't know what's going to happen. There could have a tornado. And visions of Wizard of Oz flew in your head? Or rather, instead, were you at peace and said, God, nothing can take me unless it's my time. You're the one that's in control of my destiny. You're the one, oh God, that I trust. And besides the fact, even if this tornado is from Satan, Lord, you are the one that, man, how much worse would it be if you didn't keep it in check and set the boundaries up? You see how worship can work? And all I'm telling you is I'm fully convinced that that's what Abel did. His offering was out of his faith. His faith was because of his admiration and worship of God. It evoked and it stirred in him to the point, I've got to do something. I need to express my appreciation for all that you are, just as God, let alone all that you've done for me. And I just think that that's pretty cool. In fact, I would almost go to the opposite extent, saying anybody that claims to be a Christian and doesn't have that attitude's got a screw loose. Something's missing in the disconnect here, because shouldn't we, of all people, on top of just what God's made, we know about the cross and crucifixion of Jesus, what should we be doing? Never stop worshiping him. But rather instead we get like the rest of the world, and our the godliness is suppressed by the godlessness of others, and even the evil as well as our own. We squelch the truth. Instead of praising God, we beg of God even, and think that we're being good Christians because, oh, God, help me. And I'm not saying that that's a bad prayer. I'm not saying I've never prayed that. I'm just saying, shouldn't it be much more about, oh, my mighty God, oh, how awesome you are, oh, the deal, like somebody said, instead of telling, God how big the storm is, tell your storm how big what? Your God is. Doesn't that make sense? And so I want you to see that this thing about Cain and Abel isn't just about Cain and Abel. It's about Steve and Julie. It's about, you guys and God. It's about each of us. And there are people that get it and there are people that don't. It's about people that worship God and look for ways to express worship to him. It can be in song, and it should be about song. God is worthy to sing to. It can be by kind deeds, and God is worthy of that. But it can be sometimes, if that comes easy to you, it needs to be another way that's not so easy, because it can also be out of sacrifice. Doing something you normally wouldn't do, giving God or giving on behalf of God something that it's not really in your nature. That's what worship is. Worship isn't doing what's convenient. Worship is going out of your way for an out of your way God. And that's the part I just want to encourage, and I hope that as a church, that in the same way we've grown in some areas, we're growing in the depth of the Bible, we've grown to learn how to love one another better, but let's not quit. But man, I certainly don't want to stop and begin to believe, because I'll tell you what, there's one of the things that I think that we're in danger of. And I think that is when it comes to offerings, whether it be of the worship kind or the service kind or the true financial kind, I think we're in danger of going and presuming, well, I do my part. And the danger of that is what? What it really is comparing ourselves to one another. And when you do that, you fall far more underneath the curse of Cain than you do the offering of Abel. Because you see, that's what Cain did, was compared. And he looked at himself and looked at him and said, well, what's the difference between, instead of looking to God and saying, I'll do more. And that's why I want to challenge us tonight, is to begin to look at and not comparing ourselves to others, but what about your worship time? Do you love God enough that, one, you're focused upon him even before you arrive at church? Number two, do you love him enough that in arriving at church that you don't let your, whatever it is, your friendliness take away from somebody else's worship? I can't tell you how it bothers me that I'm glad we're friendly. I know we're going to have hug and howdy, but sometimes, it just disappoints me. It's not like I'm mad and want to pinch off heads. It just disappoints me when I hear people coming in on Sunday morning during worship and, what about them Braves? Or, man, the weather is just crazy, and how you doing? I haven't seen you for a couple. Are you doing okay? And it's like, talking that loud. And I'm like, truly, I would say you're more interested in doing what you feel like doing than you are thinking about God, and you're not even concerned you're pulling other people and distracting other people from their worship of God. Sometimes there are weeks like this last week has been when that's what people really need to do, is to get away from the world and just be able to be in that solace and that quietness or the sanctuary moment of where, man, this is a safe place. It's where I can worship God without distraction. And so I want to encourage you as my brothers and sisters, the team that I felt with me this last week, sharing and ministering in a variety of different ways, along with you and you with me, and through prayer, being united in the Spirit. I want to ask, can we not be united in the Spirit as we worship God too? Can we not, instead of presuming, well, my worship's good enough, can we not say, how can it be better? Let me just at least ask this. Have you ever gone to God and say, God, if you were to give me on a 1 to 10 or a 1 to 100, with 100 being great or 10 being, 1 out of 10 being great, where do you consider me in my worship? And let's begin with Sunday morning and Wednesday night when you're at church. But don't stop there, because you see, I don't see where we're ever to quit worshiping God, quite honestly. But at least in those times, in the sanctuary, and I don't call that this, I want this to be a living room, but it should be a sanctuary. It ought to be a preserve. It ought to be a place where people are safe to express themselves to God without distraction. The worship team works to do what they do to present. They're trying to raise the bar and getting to where they actually, spend even more time on rehearsal so that they can, Henry, I know, prays about God, what songs this week need to happen? And he doesn't know what my message is, because I usually don't. It's this thing that we're truly seeking God together, because I'm praying in the same way. I don't have to worry about what they're going to do, because I know that he's seeking God and bringing the rest together, but they're looking at what they can do to raise the bar, to improve the worship. What are we doing? Because you see, it doesn't make any difference how good it is on stage or how much Bible I preach if we're not each together seeking God and reading on our own throughout the week. We're just playing church. So I want you to see this thing. By faith, Abel offered. And so by his belief in God, by believing that God was his creator, by this certainty even of what he cannot see, but absolutely certain of that there is a real God, then that God is really worth worshiping. And guess what? Abel didn't have a church to go to help him learn how. He didn't have a band to follow. He didn't have words on the screen. He didn't have any kind of melody. He just, from what was created around him, didn't miss God in the process. And even with what was his by possession, he began to look at that possession and go, even this isn't mine. God, you're worthy of something. Can I give you something that means a lot to me? Here you go. Now, what God needed with a sheep or a calf or anything else like that, we all know truly he didn't need anything. As I said Sunday afternoon at the funeral, that when it comes to God, He doesn't dwell in buildings built by hands, and he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. But guess who needs to worship and give him stuff? Us. Why? Insurance, for one thing. And I'm not talking about we need to buy our insurance policy because this will get us good favor. That might be there, but no. We need to do it so that we don't get caught by the wickedness of the world and its possessive nature, right? We need to do it so that we can hold things loosely instead of believing it's ours. Even the thing with each other. Because, we don't know about this life or death thing, and we don't ever know when somebody's going to be there. And really, we can't even become possessions to each other. Marriage works out best when it's two people given to each other, not two people demanding or somebody pulling in and, attaching themselves to somebody else, right? And our children, are they not a gift from the Lord? And yet, I'll guarantee you, all of us added together don't love our children as much as God does by himself. And the same way, I'm thankful to say he loves you and he loves me far more than anybody else can do. And so it's in this sharing, it's in this releasing, it's at a part of our worship where it's good to take inventory and say, what are the things that I hold on to the tightest that I need to open up my fist and say, God, I could give them to you, or I can just release them to you right now. Help me to have that balance, that they're mine because of you giving them, and might I be a good steward of them. But you see, Abel, I believe it stirred within him, and I want you to see that this is what has everything to do with why his was considered better than Cain's. But finishing this story, so we read this verse back to Hebrews 11:4. So by faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice. A better sacrifice. He offered him something that said, this is what you are worth to me. This represents me. When it said an offering, that's what an offering is. An offering is saying, I offer this to you, representation of who I am. If you were to meet a dignitary or whatever, you would want to give them a gift, and a gift that would symbolize, here's what I appreciate. When you go to or when a friend has a birthday, you try to find, you can go buy or do like DJ recommended you doing at Christmas and regifting, or you can go buy a special gift, right? And isn't it cool when you really put some thought into it and you either make or create or go get a special gift because you're really wanting to express. I don't want to ruin the story, but Tara Jo got engaged this last weekend. I mean, it finally began. They've talked all around it, but it finally happened. But it happened when she didn't think it was going to happen. And they'd gone to St. Louis, and Dave told, or not Dave, but Ryan said I wanted to go up in the arch, and so they were going up in the arch and everything, and as it gets up there, it tips, and straightens out, and they got to the top, and they're up there, and he'd already, done just the wise thing, the very smart thing, said, I was going to get you a ring, but, this weekend it didn't come together, so I'm sorry. So she went ahead and sucked it up, and okay, we'll still make the best of the weekend, and she was going over to speak at a church, so they did the arch thing. Anyway, while they're up there, Ryan goes, what's that? It's like, man, you're up, I don't know how many 100 feet up in the air, and you're looking down, and people don't seem very big. What's that? And down below were some friends that had the posters that said, will you marry me? The ring wasn't big enough to see. It was one of those canardly diamonds. I can hardly see it, but nonetheless, especially from that height, But I mean, I thought that was hilarious. I thought that was very cool of him, to set that up and to see so that his bride. Because you see, what does that show? An offering. He could have just given her a ring, or could have just said, this is what I can afford. Instead, he saved and saved and saved and saved for the right moment to be able to give. And it touches your heart, doesn't it? But let me ask you this. When was the last time you gave to God that way? Where it was truly an offering, where you said, God, this represents me. I remember hearing about the little kid that after reading about giving and hearing the preacher preach on it, man, when they came along with the offering plate, he grabbed the plate and put it on the floor and he said, can I just do it this way? Now, is that not it? But you see, instead, we feel chiseled like, oh, I got to, it's obligatory. And man, I'm thankful for those people that at least give out of obligation because, it'd be pretty tough to keep the lights on if they didn't. But man, I don't think that it always represents really us saying this exclamation point of, God, I went to special extent. I worked overtime because I wanted to give you an extra gift this week. When was the last time? And I'm not saying that in the accusative. I'm saying that's the difference between Cain and Abel, gang. Abel's was an offering of faith. It was not just a faith, okay, I'll be faithful about it because I ought to. Not an obligatory thing. No, man, it's an offering thing. An offering is above and beyond. It's saying, God, you're just so cool. I got to express it some way. How can I tell you? And then it's taking something that is of value, that he knows is of value as well, but you cherish his value, and saying, look, God, you're worth more to me than this. I give it to you. Does that make sense? I mean, because I've had people for years go, well, what's the big deal with Cain and Abel? That's the big deal. Abel is saying, this represents me and my appreciation of you. I love you, God. It turns out that it was better. He said he offered it to God. God called it a better sacrifice. Nobody else did. Abel didn't go, and mine's better than my brother's. He wasn't trying to outduel him. And you see, that's the way offerings work. You're not trying to go by or bypass somebody else or comparing yours to theirs, and mine's bigger than yours, so mine's better than yours. No, it had nothing to do with that. This better part is in the eyes of God and the heart of God. It wasn't so long ago, I believe, that I had you look at, and I'll just mention, you can go back and look it up later. I'm just going to, remind you about it in Luke 21. Verse 1, as he looked up, Jesus saw the rich putting their gifts in the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. And he goes, I tell you the truth. And, it's really hilarious because I don't think Jesus ever told a lie, did he? So when he says, I tell you the truth, what's he saying? Man, I want you to know this is really how I feel. I want you to really know this is what God thinks, because this is where we're at. I tell you the truth, this poor widow, so he recognized her poverty, has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth. She gave out of her poverty, put in all that she had to live in. Or she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had to live on. All that she had to live on. They were giving of their leftovers, and she was giving of nothing left over. It was her last meal. I mean, that's worship. And I think that we've got to begin to comprehend that's what offering is about. It's telling God what he's worth, and it's looking at you and knowing that I wouldn't have squat, God, if it wasn't you. And it's not just my money and not just my ostrich skin cowboy boots and my Harley Davidson, man. I wouldn't have the ability to speak, see, think, read, any number of things, let alone, God, if you hadn't placed exactly the right people around me, I wouldn't even have knowledge of you. I would be so far away from you. Thank you, God, for investing in me. Thank you for lining up things and people that I didn't even receive very well that you put in my life to help me to see you. Abel is just saying, God, I thank you for everything that I've got, because it really is all from you, and I just recognize I need to give it back to you. So here's my offering. I hope that gives you a better case of it. But see, it's in this regard that it was not only better, but notice what it did. And so Abel offered a better sacrifice than Cain did, and by faith he was commended as a righteous man. I think that's really cool. By faith he was commended as a righteous man. What's that mean? He had enough faith that he was commended as a righteous man? No, man, I think it was because of this faithfulness that expressed itself in worship and offering that God turned around and commended it as righteous. You see, Abraham, it was kind of that way with him, and we'll get to that one of these days if we live long enough. But Abraham was one of those guys that, it was God counted his obedience, he counted it as righteousness. His faith was, God said, look, you don't have a kid, you're going to have a kid. I don't care how long it takes, I promise you're going to have a kid, and your kid is going to bless all the other people of the world. He said, your child will go ahead and be the father of many nations. And Abraham knew there was no way because he's shooting blanks, but okay. And he knew Sarah couldn't have him if she wanted to because they tried. But Abraham goes, God, if you say it, I believe it. So where do you want me to go? He said, wherever I lead you, you go. And wherever you put your feet will be your land. So Abraham went. And God credited that as righteousness. So when he commends Abel, what he's really doing is saying, that's what I'm talking about. Because with Abel, it's even better. God didn't even tell anything that we can see here. God didn't even tell them they had to do it. It's like a kid that would go ahead, and it's one thing, and it's cool when your teachers have your kids do stuff and they bring it to you. Mommy, here's for Mother's Day. Daddy, here's for Father's Day, or here's for Christmas or whatever. But what is it like when they bring you something when it's nothing special day? What's it like, Mom and Dad? I mean, I'd just be a or a puddle. It would just break my heart and melt it down to have these kids doing. And I've been a recipient of some of the things that the kids have done here. And it's just like, I don't know how to handle that. Imagine what God feels like. We don't do it because we have to. We do it because we want to. And we do it because we're telling God this is what he's worth. His faith became something that God spoke back with faith and said, man, you've put faith in me. I recognize that, and I commend you for it. Commended as a righteous man. A righteous man is somebody that is as if they're living in this right relationship with God. That's one of the greatest definitions I can give you, and it's mine. this righteousness was always kind of perplexing to me. It's like, was it living the perfect life? Is it being like my granddad who, never did anything wrong that I could ever see, or what is it? And no, the truth of it is, righteousness when it comes to God, yes, does have something to do with sinning less for certain, with holiness absolutely, but it really has everything to do with having this right relationship. Righteousness is living with a right relationship with God as our Father, and especially when we know it's because of Jesus Christ. That's what righteousness is. Because if that's the case, you will live differently. It's not being good. People can be good without even believing in God. But righteousness, you can't be without God, because it's all about that totally right relationship. And that's what he was commended for, was he reflected a relationship with God. And again, I'll go back to your worship. Is it personal, or is it only public? And in public, is it personal enough that you don't interfere with somebody else's because you respect that as holy ground? Or does it not make any difference because it's all about you and your friendships and all this other stuff? Is worship about being willing to get here to be able to do it? And I'm not scolding, because, man, I am the last one that's going to get on anybody about not being someplace on time. I'm just saying, but there are times that we know we can go out of our way to be ahead of time, right? And I'm not saying do it because of Steve. No, I'm saying for God. God knows if you're like me and habitually late. And he knows then if I cut out time, whether it's sleeping or whatever it may be, to be there ahead of time for him, that's an offering. I'm saying you're worth it. My wife can know the same thing, especially when we're getting in the car to go up to Kinmundy. I'm not very often on time when it comes to that. But I'll tell you what, if I'm ready ahead of time, she knows that's not normal, and it's received as an offering. So I want to encourage you with your worship time, and your worship then carries on over into what you also give. Now, if you will, then let's go back over here to Genesis 4 and see what else we can pick up from just the story as it was told. And again, not trying to belabor it, but I just want you to see even a little bit more here, because I think that it does go ahead and bring some things out. And then I want to finalize it with a few scriptures that we could take a look at. So chapter 4 of the book of Genesis, it's not hard to find. It's that first one, guys. Clear to the left in a few pages, okay? Genesis chapter 4, and it begins with verse 1, and I'd like to skip this because it's so embarrassing. It's sexual in nature. Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. I got through that. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I mean, just some people get so paranoid about, the Bible is full of this stuff. Yeah, Adam lay with his wife Eve. She became pregnant, gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord. She named him because it was with the help of the Lord. Now, this is Cain. This is the bad one. He wasn't bad from the beginning, and she saw him as a gift from God. I brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. What's he, chopped liver, Well, that first kid gets all the camera shots and everything else. The last one, when I think about it, here you go, So anyway, she got Cain and Abel. Now, Abel kept flocks. Cain worked the soil. So Abel, the one we were talking about in Hebrews, it was faithful, presented his offering. He kept flocks. Now, a lot of people, and as I mentioned a few weeks back, want to point to this and say it was because it was a blood offering. Well, there wasn't anything about that yet established. The only thing about blood that we knew of was man had the lifeblood in him, and God went ahead, and it seems as though he killed two animals to give Adam and Eve cover when they realized how naked they were. And outside of that, we're not told anything. So it's not like anything's been established. It's not like the Jewish 10 Commandments were already there. Not that you had to make these sacrifices. Nothing about that. Instead, it's pure. It's just one-on-one, these guys together and God, all right? So that's what's cool about this. But Abel was a shepherd. He was a flock keeper. Cain instead worked the soil. He was a farmer. We farmed big. We had cows and cows and chickens and hogs. We had a lot of hogs. We had quite a few cattle, and it seemed like at times a lot of chicken until we ate them, and then we'd have to go get some more. So that's the way it worked at our place. But we were farmers primarily. I was always a little embarrassed. I'd rather be in Texas being a rancher, with the cattle and stuff. But nope, we didn't. We had the deal. And so here's the two things. It is just explaining where their tendencies lay. And so one was drifted toward the flocks, the other toward the soil. And guess what? Both of them were needed for life. You don't have good crops, you don't have good cattle. You don't have cattle to eat. You don't have any reason for the crops, so to speak. And it wasn't for them I don't know that they were even eating meat yet. I don't know when. I mean, I know after the fall that kind of stuff began to happen. But what it was primarily for was to be able to take care of themselves, to have more clothes with the wool, to be able to have the milk for cooking and different things like that, okay? So anyway, this is going on. No big deal there, all right? And it says that now Abel kept the flocks, Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, verse 3, we don't know, was that a year? Was that 30 years later? Whatever. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil. Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. Now, nothing wrong with that. Nothing that we say here again that God said, here's what I expect of you. But Cain went ahead and he took fruit from the soil. And somehow, some way, he said, I believe that you're out there, God, and here you go, man. I want to give these to you. All right? So he did. But Abel brought, it said, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. Now, fat portions. I don't think that it's just necessarily like the bacon on a hog or the fat stuff that none of us would eat, like that stuff I was talking about in the Van Camp's pork and beans, they used to put in there. You bite into that, and it's like, whoa, that's gross as can be. But, so it wasn't just the fat portions that way. I think what he was talking about was that, today, or 20 years ago, they spelled it P-H-A-T, the fat portions, man. It was that kind of stuff. That was the best, right? It was the cool stuff. Thank you, Mike. I'm glad you're still with me. But it's, what it really is referring to, I think, is a finer choice cut. Now, God did it doesn't take somebody grilling out and it's usually not the meat cooking, it's the fat burning that smells good, okay? So, but good steaks will have the marbling and they'll have some of that around. So, but anyway, it boils down to Abel brought this fat portion or the good stuff. And it was not just that, but it was also from the firstborn of his flock. Now, what that reflects then within this, and some of it's reading between the lines, but later on, that's what God establishes, is that he wants the families to bring in their firstborn. That they redeem them, and then they give of them from the livestock. And then he wants the first fruits from the crops, the grapevine and the different things that grow. Now, there's nothing about Cain's that said it was the first, but along with the first kind of goes on like this idea of the blue ribbon first too, the best. And personally, I think when it spells out that it's the heart of the worshiper that counted the most. But the second thing is that heart reflected then the depth of the offering. And that's why I'm saying I think this is a challenging passage, because it challenges me anyway to think about my offerings. Are they really offerings, or are they obligations and bills that I pay because I put them in the budget, so to speak? Julie and I have worked it, and this is what we're going to do, blah, blah, blah. Or is it really, does it represent thought? And does it really represent thank you, God, and appreciation? Do I compare it to others, or do I compare it to myself? Do I compare it to how great my God is? If you knew what I give each week, would you believe that that was awesome? Because that's what I'm saying is my God is awesome. Or if you saw what I give, would you believe that I believe my God was cheap? Or he can get by without it? What do yours represent? Because that's everything that this is about. So when God looks with favor, guess why? Because it's the heart of the worshiper he's looking at. Remember, he doesn't need our stuff, but he looks at the stuff and he looks at the value it is to us, and he goes, wow, now that's an offering. Because it reflects and says, this is what you're worth to me, God, because God already knows what is valuable in our eyes. He knows the money, he knows the clothes, he knows the house or the status or whatever else our dreams are that we're saving up to one day get. And so when we offer those things to God, it absolutely brings to him either delight or okay. Now, we've all, I think, received gifts that, I hope all of you have ever received a gift that was like, oh, overwhelm, blow you away thing. One of the probably the coolest was that I paid for, but it was still an offering from Julie. It was very cool. I sold every Bronco I had to move down here. And it was a part of what we not only did to move, but it was also part of what we did to build our house. And I'm telling you, it took 3 semis and 26 trailers to move our stuff, but my Broncos and the rest of the Bronco stuff that I had. We moved from Indiana to Illinois. And so we moved down here. Couldn't do it again, and it was too expensive for storage and everything else like that. And it was just like, okay, God, this is the sacrificial stage. I just give it up. And what really irritated me was the guy that I sold to, not that I'm mad at him. It was just, I knew. And, internet was just getting going good and everything that way, is that he bought my stuff, the vast majority of a guy I'd known for quite a while, and he bought it, and he calls me and said, hey, man, it's pretty cool. The first trailer load, I made everything back that I gave to you. And I'm like, why do you even tell me that, man? I mean, I know. And he still had 6 Broncos left and a bunch of parts, So I knew, but it was the expedient thing to do, is kind of that offering to God, so to speak. And it wasn't really, because I didn't say, God, I'm giving you the money, but it was that thing of, okay, the calling, I got to get rid of the baggage. Well, so we got down here, and I don't know whether we were, I would say within the first 2 years or whatever, I saw this Bronco. It was over here on Woodstock Road. And I didn't just see it. I stopped in and looked at it, and I found out what he wanted. And, it was worth it. It was the best Bronco I'd ever seen, because up north, there's salt, and those things rust out terribly, and this one was salt-free, blah, blah, blah. So I started to, and I thought, nah, man, we're in this house, got stuff, probably just need to let it go. And one night after Wednesday night church, right around Valentine's Day, we got home, or it was Valentine's Day, and we got home, and when I pushed the garage door opener to go into my side, it was sitting there. Julie had gotten it for me with a credit card that was sitting in the, one of those that you save for this. Woo, woo. But she got it for me. I mean, it still breaks my heart. I mean, that was one of those unbelievable, out of the ordinary, extravagant gifts. What do you think? Cool, awesome. And that's what it said. Then, I think, so I've experienced that. I mean, there's others besides, and some of you, but then we also, I think all of us have received those gifts that were, okay, wow, wonder what I'll do with this, right? I mean, there's a difference with gifts, right? And I'm not talking about value. I mean, one of the coolest ones that I got this year, and we got to talk about it, Julie's folks, when we were up there with the nieces and nephews and stuff that way, but they're around Pastor Appreciation Time. I said something about really loving Reese's. And man, I still am not through all the Reese's. Kenny and several others gave me that big Super Duty 2-pounder. I mean, there's 2 of them in there. It's like, oh, and that was just so cool. But everybody said, well, why don't you tell them you like Corvettes and see what happens then, So maybe I'll try that. But I just want us to think about the offering thing, okay, and the gift thing, because that's the difference between Cain and Abel. One gave something, and one truly gave something of value and from their heart. One gave because, okay, God, thanks, man, but I've really done it on my own. And the other gave, God, I wouldn't have anything if it weren't for you. You're worth this much to me. And that's why I'm saying about our worship and our giving, that we need to really guard and question, is it calculated down to the nth degree because we're miserly, or is it extravagant with God? Because, folks, it's got everything to do then with you sensing the presence of God in your life. Because if you give to a small God, you'll have a small God. And you'll need everybody else around you to help you with whatever it might be. But if you've got a large God, it's not that you don't need anybody, but you'll appreciate everybody around you joining with and giving you the strength to endure all things. Abel, I'm convinced, he brought the first fruits from the fat portion, and it said the Lord looked with favor. This picture of favor includes, it's even more of the look, okay? It has to do with paying attention, regard. God looked, and I mean, it's like, what it really means is this, from what I could gather, and I'm not a linguist by any means, but what I could gather from trying to dig in a little bit deeper, it carries forth this concept of catching your eye and looking and going and seeing, just like I did when that Bronco was there. It wasn't the Bronco. It was my wife that had done this for me that meant the most. It was, she knew it was something that would mean something to me that she did because she saw what I had tried to do in putting the house together and everything for us. And so it was this culmination, but that's the way with God. It wasn't, you look through the offering to the person and the heart, And that's what it means when it says God looked with favor. I mean, he liked it, but he loved the heart that it was done with. And that's the part that I don't understand. How come we get stingy with God? Because what do you think? He doesn't know? I mean, I know some of you have done extravagant things for God, and I know some of you put in extravagant time here at the building and everything. And I mean, I want you to know that those are the things that God will never forget, that he will hold in account for you and can't wait to reward you accordingly. That's what the Bible says. And we're not doing it to get rewarded, but it's just one of those things. Don't let the devil steal your joy about the things that you do. Don't do them to compare yourself to others. Just do it to compare yourself to God and how great is your God, and you will have a great life. So that's what Abel did. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. That's not meaning, you're a chopped liver, man, I don't like you. It has nothing to do with not liking or loving Cain. It has everything to do with this perception, the view, the look, and the depth with which God could tell Abel went out of his way to give this. Cain didn't. And the weird thing is that made Cain mad, because he didn't get the good housekeeping seal of approval from God. And so instead of upping the ante and increasing his love of God, guess what he does? Gets rid of what in his mind is the competition. So he kills his brother. And we oftentimes will do that too. If we begin to feel like somebody is just serving too much, we'll say, well, but they've got a hidden agenda. Or if you know that somebody gives and they tithe and then they give above and beyond that, well, man, they must be made of money. Somebody must be giving it to them someplace. I've had other preachers say, he must be dealing drugs. I mean, you think that's a lie? It's not. I've been accused of that, because there's no way he could have the stuff he has. And it's just like, what's that got to do with anything? But it's just weirdness of people. And why they get in this competition, because, folks, man, the Bible, the one thing it says, if you're going to compare yourself to anybody, compare yourself to yourself. That's a fit and correct comparison then. The closing then, I know I'm out of time here, but I want you to see a couple of verses. Do you have a bunch of prayer requests tonight, or how are we doing? I mean, seriously. We got like 13 minutes. I just got to know. But because I've got some passages here I'd like to show you. All right? The one, I mean, you turn to 1 Samuel 15, and I'm going to read to you Psalm 51 that I read here a while back. Because you turn to 1 Samuel 15, and I want to read this one to you, okay? This is that one of David, remember, after he'd sinned and stuff like that? He simply says, O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. The sacrifice of God, and this is it, because this is what I'm convinced that Abel had that Cain didn't. The sacrifices of God, meaning the ones that God just cries and gets goosebumps with, if that's possible for God, and I believe it is, are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. And it says, oh God, you won't despise that. Okay? Now, in 1 Samuel 15, this is one of my favorite passages because it's terrible. It's one of my favorite passages because it would be the horror story of my life, thinking I'm ministering on behalf of God and serving God with my heart and soul, and then to lose track of that and to get on that ego trip or something like that. I don't have time to set the whole story up beyond this, that King Saul began, instead of holding loosely the things of the world, he held loosely the things of God and started holding on tightly to the things of the world. He got on an ego trip, okay? And this prophet Samuel had warned him, and that's why this is 1 Samuel. It's about Samuel's ministry with this first king of Israel. And Samuel had warned him, and he didn't pay any attention. He blew by the warning signs and went through the barricades and everything like that. And it got down to where God had told him, here's what I want you to do, and Samuel didn't do it. And so when King Saul didn't do it. So when Samuel shows up, God has already told him. And on top of that, he hears the bleating of sheep and the mooing and cows, going on. And he's going, this isn't good, because God told him to destroy everything. So, but here's the passage that I want you to look at tonight. With the Cain and Abel, the offering, the worship to God. Samuel replied, because after his excuses, Samuel replied, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the voice of the Lord? rhetorical question. What's the answer? No. I mean, you can do all your burnt offerings and sacrifices, but if you're not obedient. Jesus said it like this: if you love me, you'll obey my commands. Doesn't get much better than that, does it? To obey, he goes on to say, under the inspiration of the Spirit, to obey is better than sacrifice. And to heed, which means what? Halt! Stop. To heed. To go ahead and say, I hear you, God. I'll change my course. And you can go back, and what I really wanted to do was set this up because that's what Cain did not do. God warned Cain, and Cain did not heed it. He said, sin is crouching at your door. And Cain didn't believe God. He just did his own thing, which just shows why his offering wasn't very good anyway. To heed is better than the fat of rams. To literally stop in your tracks and say, God, I'm sorry, I'm on a reckless course. Thank you for loving me enough to correct me. He said it's better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination. And if you want to in your NIV, you can clearly write witchcraft because that's what it's implying. Rebellion is like the sin of witchcraft. And arrogance is like the evil of idolatry. Because you've rejected the word of the Lord, he's rejected you as king. I break when I read that, thinking, daggone it, Saul. So when it comes to this Cain and Abel thing, I hope I've given you a little bit more to go off of that you can share when somebody goes, well, what's the big deal? What did Cain do that, or Abel do that Cain didn't? But I also hope it's worth more than that because it's not about Bible trivia. It's instead about where am I? Where am I in my relation and my faith in God, and where am I in my worship of God? Do my offerings of any kind, whether they're offerings of service, offerings of worship and singing, or offerings of worship in my giving financially, do they represent how crazy I am about God? Or instead, do they really reflect that God is a burden to me, a necessary thing that I need to do? Because I think that if that's the case, I'd love to spend time praying for you so that God would become somebody that you love. The end.